So it's another massive day in rugby league with some breaking news. Mary McGregor will be coaching his last game for the Dragons this weekend against the Eels. I'm here with two sporting news writers, but also passionate Dragons fans, Ed Chisholm, Liam O'Loughlin. Ed, I'm going to go to you. What is your initial reaction? Mary, he's finally gone.
Two minds, really. Number one is a bit of a relief. The club's been under so much scrutiny and pressure during Mary's term. And as a fan, it's hard watching the team play under Mary's guidance, and it has been for years now. And it was pretty clear that the direction they were going just wasn't inspiring for the players at the club and potential signings as well. We've lost our identity, and that goes from the board down. So, look, it was relieving to see that it was finally over, but also I feel a sense of sadness for Mary. He's a club legend. He's obviously put so much heart and soul into that job, and everyone knows how hard he works and how passionate he is about the Red V. In a sense, it's very sad that it's ended this way. But it just had to happen, and it probably had to happen a couple of years ago.
All right, and Liam, what about you? Obviously, as someone else who has, I wouldn't say been calling for Mary's head, but you've been calling for a bit of change for a while. What's your reaction to the news this morning?
Yeah, pretty similar to Ed. Obviously, a bit of relief for the club. It was probably time that we moved in a different direction. What that direction is, I'm not too sure yet. There's thousands of names being thrown up, but my initial reaction was a bit of relief. And like Ed said, you don't want to be cheering for a bloke to lose his job. Mary's obviously a good bloke. There wouldn't be that many people vouching for him if he wasn't a good bloke. He cares about the club. He's been there for, probably half his life or more. He's, like Ryan Webb said in the press conference this morning, he's still going to be a part of the culture and a part of the club for life, because he's a Dragons man and he's an Illawarra man. So, look, it's probably a good decision from the club, but it's probably been a long time coming.
When do you think the writing was on the wall? You say it's been a long time coming, and it looks like he's almost escaped the sack a few times. How many times do you think that writing has been in the wall, and what do you think was the final straw?
Yeah, look, I think that the writing was probably on the wall from about December 2018 to about April 2019, from the Jack de Belin stuff to Gareth Widdop, a bit of rumblings about him wanting to go home to England, the Corey Norman signing, and then start of last season, Gareth Widdop going down injured with a shoulder injury really hurt any chance that the Dragons had of making a dent in the competition last year. And the Jack de Belin stuff just became a bit of an excuse, I suppose, off the field. But then I guess probably the Bulldogs game just after the COVID break was one where I thought that it was probably time, and then they obviously put some wins together. But now after those last few games where they were really in it and they really had the opportunity to win and they just couldn't get the job done, I think it was probably time to part ways.
Ed, what about for you? What do you think brought the decision forward to this week, not the end of the season?
It's a funny one. For me, I feel like the writing on the wall was for Mary was at the end of last year with our 15th place finish. He was signed up until the end of next year, but I think it was pretty clear the club was never going to re-sign him past that point. The decision to axe him now is kind of strange for me. I thought they'd wait at least till the end of the year. Well, I thought they'd wait till the end of the year to do it, and then just pay him out for that final year. But the fact that it's come 7 weeks out from the end of the regular season, I find quite strange. But there's two sides to look at it. One, you sort of cut ties and look to the future. The earlier you do that, the better. But yeah, I mean, the fact that they've done it mid-year, I find quite strange. But I mean, if it's going to happen, it's going to happen. So why not just do it straight up?
There are a couple of wins there. Obviously, Liam, you talk about that Bulldogs game that the Dragons lost, but they won a couple in a row there. I think the Sharks, the Dogs, a couple of other games. Did you think that maybe he'd turn a corner? Maybe he'd got those sort of selection decisions right, bringing in Adam Clune, Hunt to 9, those sort of things? Or do you think that this was always inevitable?
I really did think that the Dragons had turned a corner a few weeks ago. Even after that Cronulla game, when there was a bit of drama around that Jack Williams try, I still thought that against the Rabbitohs, they were a good chance of winning. And then last week against the Roosters, when the season was pretty much on the line, I still thought they were a good chance of winning with the team they had on the park. You've seen improvement in guys like Zach Lomax, Matt Duffy, Even George-Illawarra is playing the best footy of his early NRL career. So it looks like they had turned somewhat of a corner, but the losses just kept coming, and the season is over. And now there's a couple of blokes out on Friday night against Parramatta. So the season's over. It was kind of inevitable.
Ed, something I want to ask you is, in the statement that got released, and he sort of reiterated it a couple of times today, is all about this selection stuff. I had the opportunity to build my team, which we did in 2017 and 2018. Unfortunately, we have not put that same side on the field since, for a number of reasons. How much of a factor do you think this selection panel can play in sort of the Dragons, I guess, poor form over the last few years? And do you think Mary's right?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is with the selection, as soon as the selection panel came in, we started winning games. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I thought it was a good idea. Dragons fans collectively have always found Mary's team selections baffling. His tendency to stay loyal to underperforming big name players has hurt us over the years. And as soon as that panel was brought in, you saw the likes of Matt Duffy recalled and playing with a different level of confidence we've never seen. Zach Lomax found some form. And then as Liam highlighted, a couple of the other outside backs, some of the younger forwards like Jackson Ford, Josh Kerr, all these players started playing better when that panel came through. So, I mean, there's rumours that Shane Flanagan and a couple of the other assistants had their fingerprints over the team a little bit more once that panel was introduced. And I think there's no coincidence why they were playing a little bit better. But yeah, I thought that comment in the statement was also quite interesting. I think what he was referring to was the team's recruitment policy. Obviously, Mary, since 2017, hasn't had a say in who the club recruits. That's been Ian Millwood's job. And after that 2018 season, we lost, Leeson Armour, Nene McDonald, a couple of key players in that season where we almost made a prelim final, but never replaced them with like-for-like talent. We sort of went back into, the depths of our reserve grade setup and picked players from there, but they were never as good a quality as those two players that we lost. And then the Jack de Belin thing, Gareth Widdop's injury, that never helped Mary's chances either. In a way, he can't help that, but you've got to do what you can with what you've got, and Mary just couldn't achieve that. So,
Liam, what do you make of some of these recruitment decisions? I mean, Ed obviously spoke about some of the players that left the Dragons, but when you consider some of the players that have come in since Mary joined the club in 2014, do you think that's part of the problem as well?
I think probably earlier on in his tenure, the recruitment was pretty good. I thought since Mary has been at the club, we've brought in Tyson Frizzell, Paul Vaughan, Tarek Sims. Those guys have all gone on to play State of Origin football. Mm-hmm. Ben Hunt has, probably not been as strong as he was at Brisbane, but he's still been a fixture in the State of Origin lineup for Queensland as well. So you have to give him a little bit of credit there because he has brought in players that have, performed and played at representative level. But in probably the last 18 months, the recruitment and retention has been pretty interesting, to say the least. I think Trent Merrin and Isaac Luke, obviously experienced guys, but they're well past their best football. I think I've reshared something on Twitter the other day. At the end of 2018, we let go Hame Sele, Ruben Garrick, and Patrick Herbert, and they're all excelling at other clubs. We also saw Luciano Leilua leave at the end of last season, and now he's arguably one of the informed second rows of the competition. So it's kind of looking at it like that is why we're letting players go that have been brought through the system and we could have signed for less money than when we're going out and recruiting people that aren't coming in and performing.
Ed, looking at the numbers, obviously since 2014, 150 games bang on that Mary has coached, 69 wins, 46% win ratio. How do you rate his time at the club?
There's been a couple of years where, we started strong and faded towards the end of the season. But for me, throughout Mary's tenure, we've just had this satisfaction with being close enough. And for a brand like St. George-Illawarra, that's just not good enough. Through that time where Mary was under a lot of pressure, a lot of his messaging was, how close we came in 2018 to making that prelim final against South, where we, narrowly lost to South Sydney. But I think that's Mary's biggest problem is that's good enough for him. Whereas that's not good enough for Dragons fans. We need to be the team that's, pushing the grand final. We've always been one of the most successful successful clubs in the competition, a foundation club, you know, who's synonymous with success. And we haven't had that since 2010, but definitely throughout Mary's tenure, we haven't even come close to being, you know, that consistent, successful club that we really should be. So look, as I said, I love Mary as a guy, and I think he's such an important icon of our club. But you know, his position as coach just became untenable, and that win-loss ratio sort of speaks for itself. It's just not good enough, especially for what's now the longest-serving coach in the joint ventures history, which is pretty damning, I think.
Liam, Ed mentioned 2018. I think Mary said in his presser today that they were almost unbeatable in 2018 and sort of spoke about that success. I mean, even looking back at that year, they didn't end up finishing in the top 4. Obviously, there was that good win against the Broncos in the finals up at Suncorp. But was that enough to hang his hat on for so long?
Look, I think 2018 was a real roller coaster year. I don't think it's something that he can hang his hat on necessarily, but I think that there were a lot of things that went wrong, and they still managed to get so close to a prelim final. That win against Brisbane is something that I'm probably not going to forget for a very long time. And, you know, backs against the wall, that sort of stuff. And they came out and belted Brisbane at their home ground. But yeah, that we came close to a prelim final isn't really good enough. I grew up in an era where, you know, in the, you know, mid 2000s where prelim finals was just what the Dragons did. And then 2009, 2010, 2011, they were, you know, top 4 sides. So almost making a prelim final. And also 2015, it was early in his tenure, but we lost to Canterbury in the first week of the finals. That's another one that sticks out, where, you know, we could have made a bit of a run. But yeah, I think overall Mary's ride at the Dragons was a bit of a roller coaster.
All right, the next big question is obviously Mary's gone. Dean Young is in as his replacement. Is he a permanent replacement, Ed, or do you reckon someone else should be coming in as coach? And should it be someone completely with no ties to either the St. George or Illawarra parts of the club?
It's an interesting one. I tend to think that, you know, Dean Young's still a bit too young in his coaching career. And I think the Dragons have made this mistake before of going down the path of a club legend as their coach. And you know, it's a bit of an old boys club. And I think that's been one of the biggest problems. We're too obsessed with our past, and we need to look to the future and rebuild the club and sort of find a new identity, because, you know, every other club that's in a rebuilding phase is doing that. And for that reason, I think we need to go outside. I'd love to see the club bring in Craig Fitzgibbon first and foremost. But the other thing is, I'd also be happy for Dean Young to see out next year and wait for Shane Flanagan's deregistration ban as a head coach be lifted. I think Flano, you know, really fits the bill for the type of coach that could, you know, help the Dragons rediscover their identity. And even him just in the background, sort of in Dean Young's year next year could be really good for Dean Young's development as a coach as well. So those are probably the two options I'd like to see them follow. Craig Fitzgibbon. We've seen how successful Adam O'Brien has been at Newcastle in his first year. And I think that's just indicative of coming from a system like the Storm or the Roosters where, you know, success is just second nature. I think that's sort of the path the Dragons should be following.
Liam, do you agree?
Yeah, Craig Fitzgibbon is probably, he's got to be number one target. Outside of that, there's a lot of good coaches that don't have jobs at the moment. There's Anthony Griffin, Jeff Tuvey. They're both, you know, established coaches that could come in and do a really good job. No nonsense sort of guys, very experienced. Jason Riles at the Storm is another one. I know he's an ex-Dragon, but he hasn't been involved with the club since he stopped playing. So I feel like he's kind of distanced himself enough from the club where he'd be able to come in and he wouldn't have that sort of old boys mentality that, say, if Dean Young was to take over. Yeah, I don't know about waiting another year for Shane Flanagan, because I feel like that would just make next year another write-off, and then we go again in 2022, and then, you know, that's no guarantee to work. Or Shane Flanagan might look elsewhere for a job. He might get an offer 2022 and beyond. So I feel like we need to appoint someone for next year and not be waiting for the year after. And if that's Dean Young, that's Dean Young. But ideally, I think looking elsewhere would be the way to go. Boys,
to finish off, I just want to get your take on where the Dragons are now. I know Mary said today, like, I'm doing what's right for the team, not necessarily what's right for me. What happens next from here? Is this Dragons problems all solved, or is there a lot more change that needs to happen before the Dragons get back to their competitive side that, Liam, you mentioned in the sort of mid-2000s, early 2010s?
I feel like there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. I feel like the recruitment and retention is very subpar at the moment, and that obviously it can't be put on Mary because he's not having the final say. So Ian Millwood is probably another one that might be under a bit of scrutiny towards the end of the season or in the off season. For us to miss out on guys like Adam Elliott, Corey Harawira, they've said no to Alex Johnston. There's lots of good players going around in positions that ideally the Dragons should be looking to fill, especially losing Tyson Frizzell next year. And we don't really have, that game-breaking winger. I feel like, missing out on players like that is a bit disheartening for a lot of fans. And I think there's a lot of frustration about that sort of thing. So that's why I feel like the recruitment and retention needs a massive look at in the next probably 6 to 12 months.
Ed, and you, what happens in the next 12 to 18 months for the Dragons, and is it problem solved or much more? Or was this just the tip of the iceberg?
Yeah, I definitely side with Liam. I feel as though Mary's resignation sort of just paves over what's a broader issue at the club, and that's, as I said earlier, the satisfaction with mediocrity. And until that changes, I can't see us making any sort of leaps and bounds forward. I think there just needs to be a big culture shift, and I think a lot of that could come with a big clean out in the football department. Not necessarily the assistant coaches. I think we've got a good setup there, but as Liam alluded to, I think we just need a new sort of direction from our recruitment. It's pretty sad, as Liam said, the number of names that have come up onto the market, and we haven't even come close to signing. We just need some fresh ideas, and I think that could come from board level down. The coaches a new coach is one step, but I think there needs to be a lot more change before the Dragons have consistent success.
Well, guys, a lot more news I'm sure will be coming out of the Dragons for the rest of the year. To keep up to date with all that and the rest of the NRL, make sure you head to Sporting News' website or our social channels, and we'll see you there.